11 seconds. That was all it took for me to realize I had raised a snake right inside my own family. I was about to change Alara's life with $7.9 million, but 11 seconds standing outside my daughter's front door changed my life forever. My name is Silas Vance. I am 63 years old. 41 years of my life have been spent on black ribbons of highway stretched across state lines. I have driven 80,000-pound beasts through blinding snowstorms in Wyoming. I thought I had seen every kind of danger this world had to offer. But I was wrong. The greatest danger was hiding behind this peaceful, white-painted door. In my hand was a cream-colored folder. It weighed less than 1 pound, but it carried the force of a nuclear explosion. My brother Elias had passed away and left me his entire estate, $7.9 million. That number was enough to pay off Alara's mortgage in full. Enough to buy little Wyatt the best toys and secure his future in college. I stood there with my hand touching the doorknob, but I had not turned it yet. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to see tears of happiness in my daughter's eyes. But then Dominic Thorne's voice came from inside. My polished son-in-law. His voice was as cold as black ice on a midnight road. He was talking about me, and he called me a burden. Welcome to Dad's real-life revenge. If you have ever been betrayed by family because of money, hit like and leave your story in the comments. We need to hear about justice. My heart tightened. The $1 million folder suddenly felt hot in my hand like a burning coal. I did not open the door. I took one step back. One step that began a journey no map could ever guide. A journey of punishment. I held my breath, my back pressed against the cold brick wall. Inside, Dominic's voice kept going. He had no idea that Silas Vance was standing only inches away on the other side of that thin wooden door. It was almost laughable. An old truck driver who had spent his entire life fighting sunstorms and endless highways was now standing outside listening to his own son-in-law like a thief in the night. Dominic was pouring himself a drink. I could hear the ice cubes clinking against the glass. That sharp little sound scraped against my nerves. He spoke with the smug confidence of a man who believed he belonged to the upper class. He told Alara that I was a financial burden. He called me a potential liability. He complained about how often I came over to visit. He mocked my flannel shirts, saying they smelled like diesel fuel and truck smoke. He said my presence ruined the elegant atmosphere he was trying so hard to build. But the worst part was his plan. Dominic was convincing Alara to put me into a nursing home. Not a decent one. He mentioned some cheap facility on the outskirts of Peterborough. According to him, it was just good enough to keep me from starving to death without draining the family budget. His goal was crystal clear. He wanted my little house. The house I had nearly destroyed my body to pay off after decades of driving through frozen highways and blizzard-filled nights. He called my retirement pension pocket change that was not even worth thinking about. I stood there, while my rough hands, hardened by years gripping, a steering wheel began to tremble violently. Not from fear, from disgust boiling deep inside my chest. Alara barely spoke. She only cried softly. Her crying sounded so weak, too weak to defend the father who had spent his entire life raising her. Dominic let out a cold laugh. He said that once I was gone he would use my house as an investment property. He painted himself a future of wealth, built on the ashes of my life. What he did not know was that this old man was holding a check powerful enough to buy 10 men just like him. I tightened my grip around the $1 million folder. A bitter taste spread across my tongue. Quietly, I stepped away from the porch. Every step felt heavy as lead. I climbed into my old Silverado. The engine roared to life like a wounded animal. I looked into the rearview mirror. My eyes were cold as ice. This performance had only just begun. Dominic wanted a poor, helpless old man. I was going to give him the most pitiful, confused old fool he had ever seen. But behind his back I would weave a trap so tight that a man like him would never escape it. The curtain had finally risen, and an even darker truth about Dominic was about to come to light. Do you believe a man can fake love for the sake of money alone? The answer was hidden inside the drawer of Dominic Thorne's desk. I sat in the darkness of the truck cab. The smell of old leather and cold coffee wrapped around me. Across the windshield, the lights inside Alara's living room were still glowing. But to me, that house now looked like a devil's den. Alara's crying still echoed inside my head. Weak. Painfully weak. Then Dominic's voice came back again, quieter this time. Calculating. He mentioned paperwork. A power of attorney. He wanted Alara to help trick me into signing it. He claimed I was starting to show signs of memory loss. He said it was the only way to protect the family assets before I wasted everything on foolish things. The irony almost made me laugh. That man wanted to control the finances of someone who had never even owed a single traffic ticket in his life. He wanted to turn me into an incompetent old fool on paper. I looked down at my hands. Thick knuckles, rough skin, scars from repairing engines beneath frozen trailers and temperatures below zero. These hands had fed an entire family. Now they were trembling with a cold and murderous rage. Slowly I started the engine. I did not turn on the headlights. I backed the Silverado out of the driveway like a ghost. I did not want them seeing me tonight. I needed silence. I needed room to think. Dominic Thorne had no idea what he had just awakened. He thought I was an old piece of furniture waiting to be thrown away, a problem to remove before he could sink his claws into my little house. What he did not know was that the cream-colored folder beside me contained $7.9 million. And what he definitely did not know was that 41 years on the road had taught me how to spot disaster long before the crash happened. Dominic was an oil slick on black ice. And I was not about to lose control. I drove back toward my empty house while my mind began building plans like blueprints. I needed to know why he was in such a hurry, why a man wearing watches worth more than most people's monthly salary was so desperate to get his hands on a retired truck driver's modest home. I parked in front of my house. Tonight I would not sleep. Tonight I would prepare a gift for Dominic. A gift wrapped in deception. But there is one thing I have not told you yet. When I looked through the crack in the door, one final time, I saw Dominic pull a stack of red overdue notices from his briefcase. Under the living room light, his face had turned pale. The man was drowning in debt, and the amount was far bigger than Alara could ever imagine. My son-in-law's cruel little plan was never just about stealing my house. He was dragging my daughter down into the abyss with him. I stepped into my empty house. Silence swallowed everything. I tossed my keys onto the old wooden table. The dry clatter echoed through the darkness. Beside it sat the $1 million folder motionless like a sleeping monster. I lowered myself into the worn-out armchair. For 41 years, I had faced blinding snowstorms and endless highways. I had hauled 80,000 pounds of cargo through deadly mountain curves where one mistake could send a man straight into a frozen grave. Black ribbons of asphalt had never frightened me. But the coldness in Dominic's words was different. It seeped into my bones, and it forced me to face a painful truth. My son-in-law was not family. He was a predator. When he looked at me, he did not see a man. He saw scrap metal. An old truck driver in grease-stained flannel shirts. A lonely old fool whose life could be stripped apart piece by piece and converted into cash. Dominic believed he was clever. He believed expensive suits and polished shoes could hide the rot underneath his skin. That was when the rage began to rise inside me. Not loud rage, not screaming rage, cold rage. The kind you feel when your engine dies in the middle of nowhere at midnight. You do not panic. You start looking for tools. I stared into the mirror across the room. The long-haul driver was back. I was no longer some helpless old father waiting to be discarded. Dominic wanted a game. He wanted a confused old man he could manipulate and control. Fine. I would give him the perfect performance. I would become exactly what he wanted to see. An aging Silas Vance. Slow, forgetful, harmless. I would let him believe victory was already sitting in the palm of his hand. But hidden underneath that disguise, something else was taking shape. A response. I was not just going to protect my money. I was going to rip the mask off his face before he could make his move. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out an old address book. It was time to call some old friends. Men who knew how to dig into places, respectable people, avoided. Men who understood how to follow shadows without leaving footprints behind. Dominic had forgotten one important thing. Truck drivers have a network far larger than most people realize. And when we decide to settle a score, we do not stop halfway. Black ice and cold fury were waiting for Dominic Thorne just up the road ahead. And if you think this story is already dangerous, wait until you see the gift I prepared for him next. The next morning I began my transformation. I picked the oldest flannel shirt I owned. The elbows were torn and the fabric carried grease stains that would never come out. I deliberately skipped shaving. I let my face look tired and worn down. A washed-up old truck driver. That was the image Dominic wanted to see. I drove to my daughter's house and forced myself to walk slowly. I let my shoulders sag a little. When I stepped into the kitchen, Dominic was already sitting there scrolling through his expensive tablet with an irritated expression. I pretended to struggle with my old phone before shuffling closer to him with a confused look on my face. I asked why milk prices at the grocery store had gone up so much lately. I muttered about not understanding why my pension payment was delayed this month. Dominic looked up at me with pure disgust in his eyes. He sighed, as if answering me was the greatest burden in the world. Then I delivered the final touch. I asked him if he could explain the Google to me. I told him people kept saying it had all the answers, but I did not know where to click. A smug smile spread across his face. He glanced at Alara, as if to say, "Your father really is losing his mind." Then he started explaining things to me in the same tone someone would use with a 3-year-old child. I nodded eagerly. I even pretended to take notes on a scrap piece of paper. I let him believe he was the smartest man in the room. What Dominic did not realize was that while he was enjoying his moment of superiority, I had already glanced across the documents sitting beside him on the table. Overdue notices, debt statements, bright red numbers, screaming from the pages. Dominic was drowning, while desperately trying to dress himself like a successful gentleman. A few minutes later, I thanked him for his help and left the house looking grateful for his wisdom. But the second I stepped outside, my posture changed. I no longer walked bent over. My eyes sharpened like steel. The performance of the confused old fool had worked perfectly. Dominic had completely lowered his guard. He believed this old sheep was finally ready for slaughter. But this game was only halfway finished. While Dominic was dreaming about stealing my house, I had already begun a quiet investigation of my own. Men buried under mountains of debt usually leave dirty footprints everywhere they go. And what I found was far worse than unpaid crypto loans. Dominic did not just want my money. He was hiding something that could completely destroy Alara. Tell me something. How far do you think a desperate man is willing to go behind his wife's back? I did not go home. Instead, I drove straight to an office hidden at the far end of Bay Street. No sign outside, no fancy lobby. Just frosted glass old wood and the kind of silence that usually surrounds dangerous conversations. An old friend was waiting for me there, a lawyer who specialized in ugly legal wars, and beside him sat a forensic accountant with eyes sharp enough to cut steel. I placed my $1 million folder on the table as a retainer fee. Then I gave them one instruction: dig into every corner of Dominic Thorne's life. The results came back faster than I expected. Dominic was not just an arrogant son-in-law. He was a starving gambler. The financial reports spread across the desk like wreckage from a highway pileup. He had poured nearly every dollar he could find into nameless crypto platforms and high-risk schemes. He was carrying underground loans with interest rates brutal enough to destroy a man in months. But even that was not the worst part. The accountant slowly slid a copied bank document across the table toward me. The moment I read it, the blood in my veins turned cold. Dominic had secretly forged Alara's signature to borrow a massive amount of money from the family trust. He was using my daughter's name as a shield for his failures. This was no longer about greed. This was a crime. Dominic was not just trying to steal my house anymore. He was dragging Alara into financial ruin and possible criminal charges without her even knowing it. I clenched my fists so tightly my knuckles turned white. That polished little predator thought expensive suits and a shiny Omega watch could hide the filth underneath. He believed an old truck driver would never notice numbers disappearing from documents. But Dominic had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the man he was hunting. I stared down at the evidence, while a cold fury settled over me like winter ice. Dominic had already dug his own grave. If he wanted to play games with forged paperwork, then I would let him sign his own destruction. I instructed the lawyer to prepare a counterattack package. A collection of documents so devastating that the moment Dominic opened it, every illusion he had carefully built would collapse around him. Still, the performance had to continue. The poor, confused old man. The harmless father, in stained flannel. Dominic was already arranging a lunch meeting, where he believed he would secure total victory. He expected to see Silas Vance nodding along, ready to surrender everything. But there was one tiny detail he had overlooked. While he was busy mocking me and teaching me how to use the Google, I had quietly activated something on that old phone, a recorder. And before I left that kitchen, Dominic had unknowingly revealed another secret. One so ugly, it could shock the entire city. Tell me this. What kinds of things do people confess when they believe nobody is listening? I invited Dominic to lunch at an upscale steakhouse. Actually, he chose the place himself. Of course he did. Dominic loved expensive places because they helped him maintain the illusion that he belonged among wealthy men. He wanted one final performance before shipping me off to a nursing home. I arrived wearing an old sweatshirt and a pair of worn leather shoes with cracked heels. I made sure I looked small, tired, and completely out of place inside that polished restaurant, glowing with crystal lights and polished silver. Dominic ordered an expensive glass of scotch. As he sipped it, he casually flashed the $8,000 Omega watch hanging from his wrist. He had no idea that watch was paid for with Alara's silent suffering. Then he slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. Full power of attorney. His voice turned smooth as honey while his eyes stayed cold as winter ice. He told me all I had to do was sign the documents so he could help manage things for me. I picked up the pen and deliberately let my hands shake. Then I looked at him. The greed in Dominic's eyes was impossible to hide now. He stared at me like a wolf, staring at a lost sheep, never realizing the sheep was carrying a bomb in its pocket. I nodded slowly and pretended to agree with every cruel condition buried inside those papers. Dominic smiled with complete satisfaction. In his mind, he already owned my house, my money, my life. Then the bill arrived, and just as I expected, Dominic let it sit there without touching it. A man wearing a watch worth more than a factory worker's yearly salary still expected his poor old father-in-law to pay for lunch. I slowly pulled out a handful of wrinkled bills. The disgust on his face was obvious. What Dominic did not understand was that every dollar I spent that afternoon was buying Alara's freedom. I stood up and smiled at him, and if he had been even slightly intelligent, he would have recognized the death hidden inside that smile. Dominic rose from the table looking like a victorious king. He had no idea the entire conversation had been recorded. Every threat, every manipulation, every word. And the proof of coercion was now safely stored in my pocket. But the thing Dominic never could have predicted was where I went next. I was not going home to pack my belongings. I was driving toward a meeting Dominic would never want to happen. A meeting powerful enough to change everything by tomorrow morning. Tell me something. Who do you think was waiting for me inside that lawyer's office at sunrise? Because the person sitting in that room was about to become the knife that pierced straight through Dominic Thorne's greedy heart. The next morning, the lawyer's office was flooded with cold sunlight. Dominic walked in like a king entering his palace. He wore an expensive gray suit and polished leather shoes that gleamed against the marble floor. Alara followed beside him, with her head lowered, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked less like a wife standing beside her husband, and more like a prisoner walking toward execution. Dominic placed his briefcase onto the oak table and smiled with complete satisfaction. To him, this was harvest day. The reward for all the manipulation, lies, and cruelty he believed had finally paid off. He glanced at me. I was still sitting there in my old worn clothes, with the same defeated expression on my face. Dominic could barely hide the victory in his voice, as he urged everyone to hurry, because he had another event to attend afterward. My lawyer calmly slid the documents across the table toward him. Dominic picked up the pen with breathtaking arrogance. What he did not know was that every important number inside those papers had already been changed. He believed he was signing documents that transferred my property and control of my finances. In reality, he was opening the cage that would trap him. I turned my eyes toward Alara. I wanted my daughter to see the truth. I wanted her to understand that her father was never confused, never weak, and never blind to the monster sitting beside her. The air inside the room became unbearably heavy. The hum of the air conditioner sounded like the ticking of a bomb counting down its final seconds. Dominic twisted the cap off his pen and looked at me one last time with absolute contempt. Then the tip of his pen touched the paper, and at that exact moment the office door burst open. The confidence on Dominic's face froze instantly, because the people entering that room were not just high-powered attorneys. They were the very people Dominic had spent the last 6 months desperately trying to avoid. Sweat immediately appeared along his forehead. Suddenly the expensive suit no longer made him look powerful. Now he looked like a cornered rat. But the nightmare was only beginning. Tell me something. What would happen if every lie a man carefully built his life upon suddenly walked into the same room all at once? Because among the private investigators and legal representatives entering that office was one person Dominic believed he had already silenced forever with money and threats. And the moment that person stepped into the light, the truth became far more horrifying than any of us had imagined. Dominic froze. The pen slipped from his fingers and struck the oak table with a sharp crack. The people walking into the room were not strangers. Police officers, and the forensic accountant I had hired. Dominic stammered as he tried to recover the fake confidence he always wore like armor, but sweat was already soaking through the collar of his expensive dress shirt. Slowly, I stood up. The helpless old man was gone. No slumped shoulders. No confused expression. I looked straight into his eyes with the cold stare of a truck driver who had survived millions of miles of blizzards, black ice, and midnight highways. Then I slid a check across the table. $7.9 million. Dominic's mouth fell open. He looked at the number, then back at me, as if he were staring at a ghost. Ilara was just as stunned. A broken sound escaped her lips, but no words came out. I kept my voice calm and deadly cold. That money belongs to the Vance family, I told him, and it was never meant for a man named Thorne. But that was not the killing blow. My lawyer activated the screen behind him. One by one the evidence appeared. Forged signatures, bank records, illegal transfers. Then the audio recording from the steakhouse began playing through the conference room speakers. Dominic's own voice filled the room. Every insult, every threat, every word about treating me like a burden, every plan to steal my property, every disgusting confession. Ilara slowly turned toward her husband. The horror in her eyes was unbearable to watch. When Dominic reached for her hand, she jerked away from him as if he had burned her skin with hot iron. That was the exact moment Dominic's entire world collapsed. The mighty businessman dropped to his knees on the floor. He begged, he cried, he blamed debt, pressure, bad investments, anything except himself. But nobody in that room cared anymore. The police officers stepped forward. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the office like the closing of a coffin lid. Dominic Thorne was led away in total humiliation. His career was gone. His marriage was destroyed. And now his freedom belonged to someone else. Ilara collapsed against my shoulder and cried. But this time those tears were not tears of fear. They were tears of release. For a moment it felt like everything was finally over. Dominic had paid the price. My daughter was safe. Justice had won. But while gathering the papers scattered across the table, something slipped from Dominic's briefcase. A small envelope. Inside was no cash, no debt notice, no legal document, just a photograph and an address, a hidden address that even my private investigators had somehow missed. I stared at the image while a cold feeling slowly crawled down my spine, because it suddenly became clear that Dominic Thorne was not the only person hunting my family, and the truth hidden behind that photograph was far darker than anything we had uncovered so far. Dominic was gone. He received a 4-year prison sentence for everything he had done. But even after the explosion ends, the shockwaves remain. I used a small portion of the $7.9 million to buy something more valuable than revenge. Peace. A new home for Ilara and the children. A place untouched by lies, manipulation, or fear. Now I sit on the porch of that new house while the wind rolls across the fields carrying the scent of wild grass. Wyatt sits beside me, busy pushing around the toy truck I bought for him. After a while, he looks up at me and asks a question no child should have to ask so early in life. "Grandpa, does money make people evil?" I place my hand gently on his head, then I tell him the truth. Money is like fuel, son. If you use it to guide your family forward, it becomes a blessing. But if you use it to burn everything around you, it becomes poison. Dominic made the mistake of believing family was something to mine and exploit. He looked at an old truck driver like me and thought I was the easiest target of all. I stare out toward the horizon where the black ribbons of highway still seem to call my name. Dominic lost because he underestimated the strength of a father. He never understood that underneath an old flannel shirt stood a block of steel forged through millions of miles on frozen roads and lonely nights. He thought I was a mine waiting to be stripped apart. But he was wrong. I was the dynamite. Slowly, I pull the photograph from Dominic's briefcase back out of my pocket. The picture shows a strange man standing in front of my old house. On the back of the photograph is a handwritten message. "See you again soon, Silas." A storm like this never truly ends. But Silas Vance is ready now. I am no longer afraid. Money can buy houses, but it cannot buy character. Thank you for staying with Dad's real-life revenge all the way to the end of this story. If you believe family should be loved instead of exploited, share this video and let others hear this message. Thank you for listening to my story. Darkness is beginning to fall again, but this time, I am the one holding the light. Dominic's war may be over, but another mystery has already begun. And the truth about my brother, Elias's past, is far more dangerous than anything Dominic Thorne ever imagined.